Beyond the statewide candidates, the poll also examined voter opinions as they relate to the proposition measures that we're going to be seeing in November. The first two, Propositions 1 and 2, were placed there by legislative action and enjoy strong support by Governor Jerry Brown. They really both speak to conservation, although in very different ways. The first is talking about the conservation of water resources, and this measure, Proposition 1, enjoys very strong bipartisan support.
Over 63% of voters are supportive of it. It looks like it's going to pass and pass with a fairly high number. This really appears to be due to the fact that the drought is on people's minds. It's a very serious issue. This will not solve the drought, but it adds some features which will address both short-term and long-term issues associated with the drought, and will try to put California in a bit stronger footing moving forward. The governor is also campaigning a lot for Proposition 2.
But you're also seeing support, at least at 53% right now, on conserving financial resources, conserving money, setting aside a rainy day fund.
Really, as we've seen over the course of the last 10 years, the state has been ping-ponging back and forth between budget deficits and some fiscal instability. The governor has eliminated a lot of those deficits. He has worked very hard to rein in some spending in the state capitol. This would just codify that for the future.
And he's spending resources to make sure that not only his reelection is successful based off of those two, but to also kind of establish a legacy of both conserving resources, financial resources, and conserving water resources in a time of drought.
Probably the most hotly contested proposition in this year's ballot is Proposition 46. It would limit the cap. It would raise the cap on malpractice lawsuits to 1.1 million from 250,000. That was set back in 1978, and proponents argue that it's been a long, long time and should be higher than what it was at that time. It would also institute drug testing for doctors and medical providers.
When we first examined this issue in the first week of September, we found that 62% of California voters supported Proposition 46.
It's dropped an enormous amount since our September poll, over 20 points. Downward trajectory at this point in the campaign generally means something is probably not headed in the right direction. It also means it's going to have a very hard time getting over 50%.
One of the other interesting demographic findings we found in Proposition 46 was that fully 57% of Latino voters support Proposition 46. Markedly different than the overall electorate at 42. In fact, it's the only voter group that supports Proposition 46 at this time, and there's a lot of speculation as to why that might be. First of all, the opponents of Proposition 46 have for many years suggested that one of the largest communities that would be impacted would be the Hispanic community, because as medical malpractice rates rise, community and free clinics are more susceptible to lawsuits for medical malpractice when it essentially have to shut its doors. At least at this time, that argument is not carrying much weight. It doesn't seem to be having the resonance that I think the opponents would. So while Latinos still have the strongest vote support for Proposition 46, the overall electorate is decidedly against it, enough to bring those numbers far below the 50% threshold needed for passage.
California is well known for its three strikes law, which has put a lot of individuals behind bars, and it was a very tough sentencing guidelines implemented many, many years ago. There have been some questions as to whether that's been effective or it's catching too many people who really shouldn't be in prison for long term, but who are getting caught up in the three strikes law. This Proposition 47 is also on the ballot this year, and it's an attempt to change that, or at least address that. And it would make certain felony convictions for certain drug offenses, property offenses, reduced from a felony to a misdemeanor. It has actually a fair amount of broad support. There's been a lot of questions around the size of the prison population in California. Are we sending too many nonviolent offenders to prison? This is an attempt to remedy that, and it looks like as of right now, the public seems to be on its side. It's doing quite well in our poll.